Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our Strategic Resume Writing webinar. My name is Brian Allen. I am a senior consultant with Career Management Partners, and it will be my pleasure to be your host for the next hour as we explore this critical topic for a successful job search: how to market yourself on paper, how to put down your work history and value in such a way as that it creates interest in you in the mind of a new employer so that your phone rings and your email box lights up. We'll be covering quite a bit of information today. I'm going to be jumping between this presentation that you're seeing and a sample resume that we have created that will kind of let you see the result of what my presentation is going to be. So let's get started, will we? Well, first of all, here's our agenda. This is what we want to cover this afternoon. We'll talk about strategic planning in a big sense, a big point of view, talk about tools and resources that you may need. Then we're going to spend some time talking about the online application process. Many of you already may be heavily involved in sending your resume to websites and job boards where employers can find you or maybe reach out to you. You may be unaware that that may be not as effective as it could be, and that's because of the online process, and we'll talk about how to be successful with that. We want to stress that it's critical for you to proofread your resume because any kind of a flaw or mistake or error, even spelling, grammatical, punctuation, spacing, different fonts in different places, any kind of an error can be considered a flaw that might make your resume uninteresting to a particularly fussy reader, and there's plenty of those out there. We'll talk a little bit about formats, but then we're going to spend some time digging into each of the different sections of the resume and going over what should be in, what should not be in. And we want to end with how important it is to put in your accomplishment statements and what they are and what they look like, because that's where a lot of people fall short of an effective resume. And at the very end, we will recap some key points before we finish up. So that's our journey. Let's get started, shall we? Now, this is the sample resume that I'm going to be looking at throughout the day or throughout the webinar. And we're going to kind of zero in on each of the different sections. Now, I'll take a moment and jump ahead to a PDF of that document so that you can see it a little bit clearer than you can see it embedded in my presentation. I just want to have you get a sense, however, of the big picture of this resume. Now, you may notice some things. I'm going to point out some things and get in more detail later on, but you do not see a lot of graphical highlights or whiz-bang bells and whistles as far as word processing tools. You don't see shading, you don't see borders, you don't see lines, you don't see a lot of that fancy stuff, and there's a specific reason for that. What you do see is what we consider to be an effective format for a modern resume, especially one that you're going to present electronically to an employer. It's got a number of different sections. You may see some of these in your own resume. You may see some things differently in your resume than what we suggest here. But this is the resume that we have created for someone else, and we're using as our model for the resume we would suggest that you try to duplicate in a number of ways. And so this is the model we're going to refer back and forth to. I just wanted to let you get a kind of an eyeball of that first before we dive into it. Okay, so talk about the big picture. What I hope happens today during this webinar is that we bring you up to date on what a 21st century resume is. Because in the 20th century, a resume was something different. In the past, a resume would have been sufficient if it were created as if it were a historical document. Not hysterical. I've seen plenty of hysterical resumes, but the word historical is what I'm talking about. A resume that was created simply to describe your work past, what you did, your activities and duties and responsibilities. Many people used to create a resume simply by copying from their job description the requirements or the objectives from their work description or the job description and plug that into their resume. That was historical in nature. Just tell what I did. That was then. Today, a modern resume, an effective resume, to be effective today, I should say, your resume should be thought of as not a historical document, but a marketing document, as a resume, an advertisement or a commercial for yourself. And so you need to perhaps change your thinking about what a resume is, and that's what we want to start out helping you to do. So in today's world, in order to be an effective resume, your resume should summarize not just your activities, but your accomplishments. And by the way, accomplishments do not have to be that large. Anything that you've done that got you noticed or made you feel good about participating, or got you rewarded in some way, that's significant enough to be considered an accomplishment. But your resume must summarize your past accomplishments in order to demonstrate what it is you're capable of achieving in the future, because that is exactly what the reader is going to be wanting to see. What can this person do for me in the future? So if your resume was created only to say what you did in the past but gives no attention to what you can do in the future, it may not be effective. Here's the 20th century truth. Today's resume is your professional advertisement. In order to be effective and competitive, in other words, in order to make your name rise to the top of the list of all the candidates who've also sent in resumes, a marketable resume must demonstrate the value that you will bring to the organization that hires you. So you have to think differently about a resume today in order for it to be effective. You need to think like an advertiser. If you were going to create an ad campaign for something, you would need to know who the targeted audience was, and then you need to craft a clear message about the values and benefits of the product and service to that audience in order to convince the audience that that product or service will meet their needs. That's what advertisers have to do. Well, you're kind of in that same role now as a job seeker. So your resume should target an intended audience, but those positions for which you're highly qualified is your target. Now, you may be sending out resumes for positions that you're not really qualified for, and that sometimes may hit. You may be lucky and they'll respond to that, but chances are you're wasting your time and the employer's time when you do that. We suggest instead to utilize what we call the 80-20 rule. And that is, if you're looking at a job posting and looking at the requirements or qualifications, what they're looking for is what's on that job posting. If you can feel comfortable saying that you can meet roughly 80% of the qualifications that each job posting is looking for, then you can consider yourself a qualified, if not highly qualified, candidate. If you fall underneath that 80% amount, you may not be as qualified a candidate. And if you're less than 60 or less than 50% of what they are, you may not be a qualified candidate, and therefore may be, again, wasting your time and theirs. You do not have to hit 100% of what they're looking for always. So apply to those things that you're highly qualified, and then in your application and in your resume, which are, by the way, two different documents, you need to make sure that you're sending a clear message about the value you have already brought to your previous employers. And whenever possible, put numbers to those accomplishments, and how much value, how often, how many hours, how many dollars, how many percentage of time saved, et cetera, et cetera. Whenever you can. Now, you don't have to always, but whenever you can, it's going to make the resume more effective. Ultimately, though, your role, your job of your resume is to convince that hiring manager that your skills will meet their needs. And so, again, you have to kind of think like an advertiser in order to prepare your resume for today's marketplace. Now, there's some tools that you may be able to gather that can help you to do this. So in advance, before you redo your resume, if that's what the case is here, you may want to think about things like pulling together a variety of different job postings that you are interested in order for you to get an understanding and a flavor of the language that they're using, the words that they're using to describe what they're seeking. And if you can get a sense of really what they're really wanting, maybe 2 or 3 different job postings are going to be similar, you may be able to zero in on what the key issues are and the key words that are used in the job postings you should use in your resume. So gather some job postings. Also maybe gather some performance evaluations or performance reviews, perhaps they're called, from your previous employment. If you have access to those, chances are that your supervisor, manager, boss, whomever prepared that probably told you something that they appreciated of you in that performance review. Well, those may be clues to help you open your eyes to your value that that employer valued you for. One of the realities that makes some of this somewhat challenging is often we are blind to our own accomplishments. We're blind to what it is that we've done well, or what our employer did appreciate about us, because we're just not self-centered. Well, not that I want to make you self-centered, but I do need to make you more aware of what value you did bring so that you can communicate that as you are describing the value you will bring to your next employer. Have some prior resumes that you've had, but again, if they're just simply historically listing what you did when, they may not be as valuable as if they showed your value. A list of action verbs. Now, action verbs, of course, verb is a word that connotates action. But those are the words that lead your bullet points on your resume. We'll look closer at those in a moment. But you do not want to use the same 3 or 4 action verbs over and over again. That can get boring in a resume. So you may want to have access to a list of those words that give you some ideas of different words meaning the same thing. Now, you can Google the phrase action verbs anywhere. You can probably go also into our Career Workspace library and find a list of action verbs in there that you could use from. You can look at a bunch of sample resumes in our library in the Career Workspace where bullets are created or resumes have been created that have all kinds of different action verbs. But anyway, the point is don't use the same 3 or 4 over and over again. And a thesaurus is also a great tool to have that'll help you to avoid using the same phrases over and over. Now, let's talk about this online application process. If you're sending your resume electronically as is applying to jobs, that's what we're talking about, and that's where many people, well, frankly, for many of you, that may be the biggest job search hurdle that you're going to face, because the companies who advertise for jobs online, on the company websites or on job boards, anywhere on the internet, when they put a job out there, they get inundated with candidates and applications, and it literally they're flooded. I have a friend who's an HR vice president who was talking to me the other day. She had she is HR at a small organization in my community, and she had an opening for one financial analyst that she posted on the internet. And she got 750 different applications for that one job. And she had to go through all of them and sort them out, and it was a huge task for her. It was a big challenge whenever a company posts jobs on the internet to have to ethically and legally deal with each of those in a fair and equitable manner. Or else they could get either sued by the government or sued by someone who felt they weren't treated fairly. So companies have to handle job applications very carefully. Well, one of the ways they've chosen to do that is to have a software package that scans every resume and has been programmed to look for certain keywords and only to bring forward those resumes that have a certain keyword count. And if your resume doesn't have those keywords in it, your resume may get ignored. Or if there's something else in your resume that doesn't align with what the software scanning program is looking for, it may get kicked out. These software scanning programs are known as applicant tracking systems, also known as ATS systems. And they're not just mid to large. Almost any company who advertises for jobs online probably has to have some sort of an applicant tracking system. They're designed to narrow down the field of candidates and to reduce the recruiting cycle. So they are a tool that benefits the company. They are not a tool that benefits the candidate. They're not your friends, by the way. The result is, though, that there's only a small percentage of resumes that really make it through this initial screening process. This happens before any human ever looks at the list of resumes, by the way. These applicant tracking systems edit them down and narrow them out to help save time and money. So if you want your resume to succeed in this scanning or this tracking process, here are a few tips to follow. You make sure your resume uses a simple font And you know, you may think that it looks good to your eye. Well, that's wonderful, but your eye may not be the eye that's making the decision. It could be a computer eye. So make sure it's one of these common font types that the systems can recognize. And don't put anything too small. Less than 10 points is probably a bad idea. Larger than 14 is probably also a bad idea. So something within 10 to 14. Avoid using graphics, lines, and tables, and large capital words, underlining, all kinds of things that your word processing software could do to make your resume appealing to the human eye may simply confuse this computer eye that's going to be looking at your resume first. Focus on the wording and context that's been used in the job posting, again, as accurately and similar as you can be. If there's a certain software program that you have known and you are familiar with, and it can either go by an acronym, the initials, or it can be described with all 3 words perhaps, you need to see how the job posting refers to that software. If it's an acronym in the job posting, use the acronym in your resume. If the job posting spells out the program, you spell it out in your resume. It's got to be equal. So make sure that what the words in the job posting, those words show up exactly that way in your resume. We call them keywords, but specifically the keywords are those that the employer is most interested in, and you don't really know what that is, which is why you need to look at a variety of different job postings, because the job postings will have keywords in them. It's just that they're going to be somewhat hidden. You can, if you get more comfortable and more experienced at looking at job postings, you'll begin to recognize where there is emphasis on certain things, or which things seem to be more important than others. And it could be how often it's mentioned. It could be where in the job posting the thing. You really never know. But that's something you kind of get the handle on as you are more skilled at reading job postings. But when you identify what you think in the job posting is a key issue or a key word, or what the employer is really going to be looking for, those words, exactly as they're in the job posting, need to show up not just once, by the way, multiple times throughout your resume. Again, because these applicant tracking systems do count them, and the more of a keyword count your resume has, the better chance it has of making the cut and getting passed on to where a human can look at it. So therefore, you may need to customize your resume slightly, not completely rewrite, but customize or put keywords in, or add some things and drop for each job that you're applying to, because each position may be slightly different. And we recommend that when you do upload a document, it be in the Microsoft Word format, the DOC file type, rather than a PDF, which is the Adobe files, because most of these applicant tracking systems can read Word files better than they can PDF files. So these are just a few tips. You may actually need, as a result of this online application, you may need to have 2 different realistic versions of your resume. One of them that you would use to send online, that follow what we've just been talking about. But you may still then have a second resume format that may be a little bit prettier, maybe a little more elaborate, have different things in it that is more appealing to you and your human eye. But you would only want to use that resume whenever you are sending it directly to an individual who will be looking for it, or if you're printing it out and hand delivering it to someone that you would be interviewing with, perhaps. But if it avoids that scanning process, then your resume may be more attractive or creative to the eye. But for those that you send online, it needs to be the online version. Okay, so we'll briefly talk about formats. There used to be a lot more information about formats out there, but essentially there's only 2 kinds of resume formats these days. The most common is what's known as reverse chronological, and that is a resume that primarily focuses on your work experience history, where you worked and what you did, and starting with your most recent job and working backwards in time. That's known as reverse chronological. Some people, if they have perhaps plenty of job experience, but they have a certain amount of expertise or a high level of skill or accomplishment in a few areas, may choose to focus their resume on those functional areas. and minimize the emphasis on the job experience itself. Instead, talk about your awards or your the white papers or the research or the books you've written or the speeches you've given or those kinds of things. Well, you know, we don't need to go into that level of detail now about why you would pick one over the other. What we suggest is most effective in today's marketplace is somewhat of a combination of those two things, where you create a resume that focuses on the job history, your accomplishments, but shows them in reverse chronological order. And so that's what we are creating, and that's what we have put together in this sample that we want to show you. And now we want to jump in and look at each of the different sections that you'll find in a resume, and then show you samples from that sample resume that relate to what it is we're talking about. Now let's start at the top. So this is what your heading is, and this is where the attention span of your reader is going to be highest. They're going to be most curious, and they're going to, you know, be willing to be entertained, if you will, or have their attention grabbed most at this top part of the resume. So therefore, this is your prime real estate, if you will, of your resume. This is where, if you don't put here the information that really grabs the attention of the reader and makes them want to know more about you, unfortunately, they may not read very much farther, and they may discard your resume. So this is critical. This is a critical point. Now, there's two sections here, a heading and a summary. Now, what you do not see in modern resumes that you may see in old-fashioned resumes is, instead of this summary, you may see something called an objective statement. And if your resume contains an objective statement, you're sending a message that you are out of touch. And that's not a good message to send in today's marketplace. Objective statements are no longer used. So instead, you're putting at the very top, after your heading. Of course, your heading is your, you know, who you are, how you can be reached. And notice this one has no street address. No, they're not going to mail you anything, chances are. And frankly, if your street address is necessary, it'd probably be more appropriate to provide that on an application rather than in the resume. But you are putting your location up there, your city, state, and zip. A phone number to get in touch with. By the way, you need to have one phone number, and that's the number you'll be most easily found at. And if you have a cell phone, you need to carry that cell phone with you and be ready to pick up a call at any time while you are a job seeker, and make sure that phone number is on your resume. Email address as well. Notice this one also has your LinkedIn address. If you do have a presence on LinkedIn, it's pretty important nowadays, and this is something fairly new, it's very important that you make access to your LinkedIn profile easy for the person, because almost every recruiter nowadays, whoever's looking at a resume, they're also going to be looking at social media. And LinkedIn is your professional side of social media, but they also will look at your Facebook and your Twitter and your Instagram and those other. You never know what they're going to do, so you know, be aware of that. But make it easy for them to find your professional profile on LinkedIn. Now, this summary, notice this one has the title, Mortgage Banking, Underwriting, Financial Analysis. This is essentially telling the reader who Chris Jones is and what he or she is about. It doesn't necessarily say the only job. This also could be considered a branding statement. This is Chris Jones telling the world, this is who I am, this is what I'm about. And then the next paragraph goes on to sell Chris to the reader in resume language. It's not complete grammatically correct sentences, by the way. Resumes kind of are their own kind of rules as far as, I mean, your name is at the top, so there's no need for you to use personal pronouns anywhere throughout your resume. You don't have to say I am just say versatile professional. But this paragraph is where Chris Jones is waving his or her flag or tooting his or her horn, not to brag, but to separate themselves from all the other candidates that the employer might be looking at, to help elevate their status in the eye of the reader. And if that feels uncomfortable or feels like it goes against your modest nature, I understand that completely, and I respect that. There is a time and a place, however, to be modest. There is a time and a place to put your best foot forward. Job search is that time and place. And this is a way to do that on your resume during your job search. You also need to be able to do that as you meet new people and they ask you to tell them about yourself, or when you are in an interview and someone wants to, why should I hire you? And they may ask you that question, but if they don't ask it, they certainly are thinking it. So job search is not a time for modesty, not a time for you to let your work speak for itself. No, you have to do that, and you have to do that on paper with your resume. Here's the place to do it. So this summary paragraph, and it can go on longer than this. Some of the sample resumes you'll find on our website are pretty in-depth. It seems to be the bigger the job, the bigger the summary is. So this is at the very, very top. This, so again, prime real estate in your resume. This is so some careful attention needs to be given to creating a message here that's going to convince someone to want to read more in your resume. Now, in addition to, and just under your summary paragraph, there is a section where you're going to tell them that you have the skills or the qualifications that they're looking for. And so there's a section that can be called skills or skills summary, where you're going to simply list the software or the skills that they're looking for that you possess or that you have had experience with. And here's where you will use those key words that you found in the job posting, or specifically use them. You can use them all over, frankly, but here's where they're going to be looked for. So if somebody is wanting to hire someone with risk analysis experience, and you see that on the job posting mentioned a couple of times, and you in fact have experience doing risk analysis in your previous work, then that is a key word you can claim on your resume, and you can put that under key skills as you see there. To be specific though, don't put your own language and use the language you found in the job posting. Now, usually these key skills here are for more soft skills, sorts of, or generic kinds of office tools or skills. If you are in the IT world, then you may have to be more specific about IT skills or technical skills, like this example here. Now, in the IT world, you know, what software programs or what language or coding languages or whatever you have had experience with, you may have to load them all up. Therefore, the technical skills section might be larger than on somebody else's resume. But again, that's only if you're in the world of IT and wanting to stay in the world of IT. So you may need, if you're in that technical role, you need an exhaustive list of those skills up front. Don't make the reader dig through your work experience to find them. Package them all in one convenient place where they can find them. Now, if you're in a less technical role, then some of these technical skills, as far as, you know, what software tools or what business programs you may have had experience with, they may be put at the top of the resume, or they may even go at the end. It kind of depends on what you're really wanting to focus on. But if you're in the technical world, this is probably what it's going to look like. Okay, now, once you have positioned yourself at the top of the resume with this is who I am, these are the skills that I have that you're looking for, here are my credentials, so to speak, then the next thing to focus on is the work experience itself. And the way you present that, and I see a lot of different formats. This is the one we recommend, where the company is focused on, and the time frame that you spent with that company is focused on that first line. Now I'm going to jump over to the sample resume just to let you see this a little clearer. So here's how the heading looks, that summary paragraph, this key skills section. Then we go into the work experience. And so we have here, and I'm going to pull out this highlighter here. So we have this section here, Main Street Bank, Centerville, New York, is where Chris worked most recently. And the time frame that Chris worked there was from 2010 to present day. Now, Chris held multiple jobs while he was in this company from 2010, and those are going to be broken down separately, not in a separate Main Street Bank listing, but in the different job titles held there. So the most recent job was mortgage underwriter from 2014 to present. Before that, he was a senior mortgage loan processor from 2012 to 2014. And then prior to that, scroll down. I have to get out of this little highlight to scroll down. Sorry about that. Prior to that, he was a senior analyst from 2010 to 2012. So he or she held 3 roles during the time that they were at Main Street Bank. Each of those roles are broken down separately, but the overall time frame with the company is shown on the top line here. So each role has its own title and the times in that title, and then a couple of lines describing what that role was responsible for, not a lot of detail. And then the bullet points here, these are what are called accomplishment statements. And notice how many numbers there are there. Those numbers jump off the page at you, don't they? That's a critical thing. That's where we're quantifying how big, how often, how many, how much, which is what's going to be interesting for the reader to see. But again, these bullet points don't just say what you did. It says how you did it, how big, what you accomplished, what the result was. And that's going to be a key point to an effective resume. And we'll get to that when we talk about accomplishment statements a little bit later on. Now, I'm going to jump back to the program now, but I just did want to highlight that for you, because that's, this is where a lot of people have missed the mark with their resumes, because in their experience, they load up their bullet points under their job experience with activities or duties or responsibilities. And again, that's more of a historical approach rather than a marketing approach. So we encourage you to think about, what did you do in each of your roles that got you recognized or that brought you appreciation in some form, whether formal or informal. I mean, a formal appreciation, though, is Employee of the Month or a Star Award or monetary or a plaque with your name on it or something. Informal recognition could be the form of just a pat on the back from your coworkers, or a good job, from your boss, or perhaps just an inner feeling of accomplishment in yourself about something you did on the job, that maybe you did it better than anybody, and maybe somebody said that, but maybe they didn't, but maybe you felt it. Accomplishments do not have to be huge, life-changing, events. They can be the small, subtle things as well. So one of the challenges that I would give to you in order to create an effective resume is for you to identify what have you done through any of your work experiences that have set you apart from everybody else, that made you stand above, or maybe got you recognized, or simply, like I said before, maybe just you're proud of it. You feel good about having done it. Allow yourself to identify and think of those things, and they need to be found. They need to find a way into your resume. So now the experience is going to take up, a substantial amount of your resume. Now, a lot of people ask the question, how far back in my work experience should I go? How much time do I need to account for? And if you're like me, you started your career in a previous century. No need to go all the way back to the beginning. However, it is important for you to cover your relevant experience, relevant to the job you're applying for. If 20 years ago you did something that is extremely similar to what you're applying to now, maybe you need to make sure that that 20-year ago experience is on your resume. However, if 20 years ago you did something in your work experience that is completely different from what you're wanting to do in your next job, then that 20 years ago experience may not be necessary for you to put on your resume. There's no hard and fast rule, but kind of the rule of thumb, so to speak, is the past 10 to 15 years of your work experience is what most employers are going to be most interested in. But again, relevancy is important as well. Is the work you have done, the experience you've had, relevant to what they're looking to hire you to do next? So let both of those things kind of guide you as far as how far back you go. Now, in addition to your work experience, you also want to talk about your education. And education, when we're talking about resumes, is post-secondary, in other words, after high school. In most professional positions that you may apply for these days, it's assumed that you will have graduated from high school, or at least have received a GED. That's assumed. So when we say education, we don't mean putting your high school down there. I see a lot of people do that, and that's really kind of unnecessary. It's also kind of not smart if you put your high school and your graduation date. The easy way for somebody to calculate your age. And unfortunately, the reality in today's marketplace is even though it's illegal and unethical, age discrimination does happen. So you don't want to make it easy for somebody to discriminate against you in your resume. So leave off dates on your education. But if you have gone to college, whether or not you've graduated, if you have any college experience, either community college, junior college, university, If you have any of that experience, that is what's called education, and that's what you want to talk about. Now, if you have a degree, you want to list your highest degree. Some people have multiple degrees. You want to list your highest degree next, or first, I should say. Include the name of the school, the location, what the degree was, major and minor, awards, honors, those kinds of things. You can see that here. It's kind of small print, I understand. However, not everyone has completed the degree. So if you attended college and earned some credits but have not yet completed the degree program, and that was my situation for many years. I attended college and then work got in the way, and I dropped out of school and went to work only years later to go back and complete my degree. So if you're kind of in that situation where you have some college but no degree yet, that's okay. List the college, the coursework, the school, and then list how many credits you've earned or how many hours you earned, or perhaps also how many hours shy or of graduation, or perhaps if you're currently enrolled, what your anticipated graduation date might be. All of that is to clarify, though, that you have attended college but do not yet have a degree. You do not want to put a college down there when in fact you've not got a degree without clarifying that you have not gotten a degree. You need to make sure that's clear. Now, for some people, though, they have no college experience at all of any kind. However, they have a world's worth of education on the job and real-world education from training and development programs that they've attended as an employee of a variety of companies. Those things are valuable as well, but they really don't fit under the title of education. They fit instead under personal development, training, or professional development, training, something like that. So all those training programs that maybe your company sent you to, and not so much how to do the job training program, but personal growth, the time management programs, the leadership skill programs, the conflict resolution, the communications, 7 habits, whatever. There's a whole industry around personal development training that companies spend a lot of money on. If you've attended any of those, you can put those in your resume, but you need to put it under the title of training or personal development or something like that. And wherever you can, list the name of the company or the name of the training program. If it was Stephen Covey or Ken Blanchard or whatever company it was that had that training program, identify the company and the name of the program. But that can be something that would add, some meat to your resume. And if you have a college degree and you have a substantial amount of professional development, put them both. Now that also brings up the question about how long the resume should be. Is it okay? Old rules, from the previous century was that you put everything on your resume in a 1 page. Nobody wanted to look at 2. Well, that's no longer valid. Well, maybe if you're a recent college graduate and you do not have a whole lot of work experience to talk about or to brag about on your resume, 1-page resume may be appropriate. By the way, if you are a recent college graduate and you have nothing but small time, odd jobs in your professional experience, then the most important thing on your resume might be your education. And if that's the case, your education may go in front of your work experience. But that would be the only scenario where that would be the case. If you have worked in the professional world for any period of time, that recent work experience most likely is going to be more important to your employer or your next employer than would be your education. So that's why we show education following work experience in most resumes. Now, going back to my question, 2 pages is just fine. Frankly, if you are quite accomplished in your professional world and your story is compelling enough and your evidence is impressive enough, then don't worry about the length of your resume. So you don't need to have 20 pages, but 3-page resume, if it's very relevant and it's a very good representation of your accomplishments, that's not going to hurt you. Now, 3 pages of duties and tasks that are really not relevant will hurt you. So you have to kind of rethink how you put your resume together. Now, in addition to these things we've already talked about, the summary, the key skills, the technical skills, the work experience, the education, the training development, you may have space on the bottom of the second page of your resume that you can fill up with other things. There are optional sections that can be added to a resume, and we've listed a number of them here. There's no need for you to try to fill up everything, but if you've served in the military, that is something that is respected in the workplace for the most part, and therefore you want to talk about that. If you have received any certifications or licenses from something where, certifications even for like driving a forklift truck, if your certification for that is current, if you're a safety engineer or quality engineer and you have certain professional certifications for those things, yeah, that's important for you to talk about. If you have certifications that give you the use of certain letters after your name, like the letters CPA, if you passed the accounting certified public accounting test, well, you would want to mention that. By the way, if you're a CPA, you probably want to put that at the top of your resume beside your name also. Well, those credentials, though, could also be listed here. Volunteer service, for example. And you see an example here on the bottom of this one where the person volunteered for, they listed under community engagement. But this person spent some time volunteering at an organization known as micromentor.org, mentoring small business owners online to help manage and grow their companies. Now, chances are Chris was not paid for that, but they utilized their skills in a volunteer effort to help small business owners. They still were demonstrating their skills, but they were also demonstrating their altruism, their willingness to go out and go above and beyond just getting a paycheck and giving back to the community. That could signal a quality or a personal characteristic that might be attractive to the employer. So there are extra sections you can add to a resume to fill out a resume, if you will, that are optional. They're not required, but if you have them and it could be impressive, then certainly feel free to put them on there. So that is, and again, let me jump back over to the sample resume and just kind of let you see what that looks like. And here's the second page. By the way, the second page needs to have some of the similar information that was on the top of your first page, but also with the words page 2 on it to let them know. Because sometimes when resumes get printed out inside of companies, they sometimes get separated, and you want to make sure your first page and your second page can be reunited at some point. And this particular one goes back to 2003, so that's less than 15 years. But again, notice the numbers, notice the responsibilities, or I should say the accomplishments that are shown in these bullets. And here's this community engagement, and here's where technical skills were moved on this resume because Chris was not in a highly technical field. But again, if they were in a highly technical field, then the technical issues would be at the very top of the resume. Okay, so now let's get to these bullets now. Let me go back to the presentation. The bullets need to focus not just on what you did, but what you accomplished, how you made a difference, what was the result. And we call those accomplishment statements. And do not get put off by the word accomplishment. Again, it does not have to be earth-shattering or huge, but it should be something that maybe not everyone did, or maybe not everyone was able to do. It should be kind of unique to you, but it should be and must be something that value or brought value to your employer. So to kind of help you over your mental hurdle, the modesty of, oh, I've done anything in my work every day. I've heard a lot of people, I've talked to people, I've said, well, what are your accomplishments? Oh, I never accomplished anything. I just did my work. Well, did you ever miss a day at work? Oh, no, 25 years and never missing a day at work. But see, that's a very good accomplishment, but many people were blind to something like that being an accomplishment. So open your mind to what it is you might have done that could be considered an accomplishment in the eyes of your potential employer. Now, to help you kind of get your memory around these things, look back at your previous job postings, or job descriptions, I should say, of jobs that you've had or the jobs you're looking for, and look at what the requirements are. Maybe sometimes they refer to that as qualifications. They may say preferred experience. Now, preferred and required are not the same thing. Again, if you have access to past performance evaluations or performance reviews, look at those to see what it is your employer appreciated of you. That can help you to kind of remember some things that could be very significant to add value to your resume. But the point is to show how your experience fits with what they're looking for. That's what your accomplishment statements really should do. They should prove that you have what they're looking for. Now, you can say you have that in this summary paragraph at the top of your resume, but in your work experience, your bullet points, your accomplishment statements are where you prove it. And again, if you bring it up in the top of the resume, you need to be able to back it up in the body of your resume, and this is how you'll do that with accomplishment statements. Think about things you've done on the job that allowed you to, or you assisted in, not necessarily you were totally responsible. You could have participated in a program on a team or a task force that might have done something which increased sales or profits, or may have reduced costs in some way, or increased productivity or efficiency. You may have come up with a new technique that saved 20 minutes per process for a process that you completed 20 times a day. So that's 20 minutes times 20 times. You add that up, and then if you shared that with 10 members of your team, multiply that by 10, and before long you've got a substantial time number that can be impressive, that you could claim that you were responsible for X number of hours of increased productivity. That's the kind of thing that's going to grab the attention of the reader of your resume. Maybe it's how you saved man hours or improved customer satisfaction. These are the kinds of business results, though, that you want your bullet points to address, that you've been a part of. And again, it's a whole different thing than just listing what you did without any results. It's more difficult to remember, or maybe to put down on paper. But so we'll give you a formula for how to write an accomplishment statement. Your bullets in the accomplishment statement should begin with an action verb. And if it's beyond the most recent job you've had, they should all be in the past tense, meaning that most of them would end the letters ED. If you're describing your most recent work experience, it should also begin with an action verb, but that action verb can still be in the present tense, especially if you're still working there. So you can literally use present tense rather than past tense, but only for your most recent job. Any previous jobs would need to be written in past tense. So your accomplishment statement should first describe the action you took, and that's that action verb, and we're using the letters, the color red here to help to indicate that, and you'll see a sentence here with these letters in them, these colors in them, I'm sorry. After you describe the action, talk about where that action was directed, what the object of the action was, and then it should also have some sort of result. And here is where you often are able to quantify what that impact of the result was with dollar signs or numbers or percentages if possible. Again, numbers really do stand out on a resume. So there's three sections to an accomplishment statement: the action, the object, and the result. So we're going to use red, blue, and green ink to show those in the sample accomplishment statements I'm going to show you now. So here's what an accomplishment statement might look like on a resume. Processed a monthly pipeline of 40 to 60 loans, ensuring all closing dates were met. What did you do? I processed. What was it you processed? Monthly pipeline, 40 to 60 loans. So what? What was the outcome? It ensured all closing dates were met. Action, object, results. Here's how another one looks like. Facilitated training that increased knowledge and performance of 50 sales staff. Prevented multi-million-dollar losses by ensuring 24/7, 365 network and server functionality. Created manuals and presentations using MS Word, PowerPoint, Visio, covering new software, services, and benefits to train nationwide sales force of 150. Hopefully you're kind of getting the gist of it. By the way, notice how MS Word, PowerPoint, Visio, those are all software programs that perhaps were mentioned in the job posting. Well, they show up again in your list of skills. Well, they can also show up again in your accomplishment statement where you use those software to create the accomplishment. And again, multiple uses of keywords is a smart thing to do in a resume. Reduced cycle time by 40 days by automating daily review of all active files. Secured new customer relationship worth $10 million in new annual revenue. So this is the kind of bullet points that is going to really get your readers' attention, make them want to learn more about you, be more interested in you, make them want to pick up the phone and call you or send you an email to invite you for a conversation. That's the goal of your resume. That's over and above anything else. The goal of your resume is to get you a phone call, get you an interview. So what we're talking about now is how to do that. And these accomplishment statements may be a little difficult to come up with, but I guarantee you, it's going to be worth the effort on your part to come up with these. Now, here is another, besides the fact that your resume today must be a marketing document, an advertisement for you. Here's another truth. Today, your resume's got to be perfect. And that's always been the truth, by the way. There are so many small errors that might get past your word processing spell check or grammar check that you may think you're fine if you hit the spell check and the system doesn't recognize any misspelled words, and then you send it out. Well, that may not mean that there's not misspelled words. It may mean that there's words that are spelled correctly but for the wrong usage. For example, how many different ways can you spell the word there? I can think of 3 different ways to spell the word. Each way is correct for one definition but incorrect for the other 2. So your spell check may not be that smart. You've got to proofread your resume. No, I'll take that back. You must have your resume proofread by someone else if possible, because you're too close to it. You've created it, you lived it. You may be looking past some of the errors that someone else who did not live it, who did not write it, might be able to easier see. So have someone, if you have a good friend, maybe, who's a very detail-oriented, maybe a nitpicker, maybe that person to frustrate you by how they always find the flaw in something, or when someone's, something is wrong with someone. That could be a person that could really be valuable whenever proofreading your resume is necessary. So proofread, proofread, proofread. It's your resume, but you may not be the best person to proofread it. You only get one chance to make a good first impression. And I know many, many people who interview a lot and look at resumes a lot kind of fall into the game of let's find the mistake on this resume. And if we find a mistake on a resume, no matter how small it may be, that might be our clue that this person is not careful with his or her details. And if they're not careful with his or her first impression document of a resume, what are they going to be not careful with of my business if I were to hire them? And that thought alone is enough to drive some people away from hiring you. A perfect resume shows you're a professional. Again, do not rely on grammar check or spell check in your song. But do that, yes, but don't rely upon it alone. So ask somebody else. Find that, maybe you're someone who used to be an English teacher, although they should recognize that resumes do not use grammatically correct, always, the structure of the sentences. Again, the accomplishment statements are kind of without personal pronouns. Here's why this is so important. In a recent, you may have heard of the ladders.com. It's a well-known job search board. They've done research that they ask, how important is it to have your resume perfect? And they found that 76% of hiring managers who were polled said that they would immediately discard a resume that only had 1 or 2 errors or typos. It's the #1 reason resumes are rejected. So, but it's your fault if there is a mistake. So be very, very careful with it. Proofread it to make sure that it comes out perfect. That's really more important than perhaps I'm stressing here, but do not underestimate the importance of a perfect resume. So proofread it, not once, twice, maybe 3 times. If you have to proofread your own, by the way, here's a little technique. Do not try to read it from the top down, left to right, as you would read a novel or anything else. Instead, if you have to read your own resume, start at the bottom right-hand corner and read backwards, bottom to top. That forces you to look at every word separately. Whereas if you're reading left to right, top to bottom, your mind may jump ahead of what your eyes are looking at, and that's where you can overlook some errors. Well, all right, ladies and gentlemen, that's our presentation for the day. As we say, we always will recap the key points, however. So we're rethinking about a resume, and hopefully I've gotten you to understand what that might look like in your own resume. But target those positions that you are qualified for, and the 80-20 rule may open those up to some other positions you may not have thought about before. But you've got to craft that resume to be attractive to that audience. So gather and prepare some tools in advance to help you to polish up your resume. Look at those keywords in the job posting. and make sure that your resume that you, especially the one you submit online, is full of those resumes, not just once, but again, it is a game. How many times can you mention that? Notice earlier you mentioned Microsoft Word in your key skills area, but you also mentioned in one of your accomplishment statements when you used Microsoft Word. That's an indication of how you can repetitively mention a key word. Keep your format simple. The bells and whistles that word processing software programs can put onto paper are not appropriate necessarily in a resume world. Demonstrate throughout all the different sections of your resume the value that you have brought to your previous employers in order to communicate the value you will bring to your future employer. And your accomplishment statements are the best way to do that. Your accomplishment statements are not just the activities that you participated in, but were the actions that you made that had results that were of value to your employer. To help you get more of a sense of this, look at the sample resume section that we have in the career workspace under the library section. There are plenty of sample resumes there for your review and for your education. They may not be exactly the same position that you're in or the position you're going for, but again, the exact is not what you're there for. You're wanting to get a sense of some of these things that I've introduced in this webinar, what they actually look like in other resumes besides the sample resume that I'm showing you today. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is our webinar. We hope that this has opened your eyes to some new realities in the world of resumes, and hopefully it motivated you to revisit your resume and to make sure that it is going to be marketable in today's marketplace. Please feel free to reach out to us if we can help you in any way. You see our email address there, www.careermp.com. My name is Brian Allen. It's been my pleasure to be your host, and I want to encourage you to be willing to go out there and toot your own horn and wave your flag to show the value that you have brought to previous employers on paper in order to attract the attention of your future employers. That's what it's really all about. Well, good luck to you. Thank you for listening to this webinar, and thank you for listening to future webinars. And also reach out to your assigned consultant if you do have one and get his or her take on some of these things and solicit their assistance in making sure your resume is going to be an effective one that will bring you the job offers that you're looking for. That's our hope for you, and hopefully this webinar has helped you to get an insight on that. Thank you much for your attention, and best of luck in your job search. This has been a presentation of Career Management Partners. Goodbye.